The scissors snipped through my hair as the classroom watched in silence. That was their first mistake. Their second, not realizing I was trained to break bones before I could ride a bike. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the girl they bullied turns out to be the weapon they never saw coming. From which country are you enjoying this story? Please make sure to tell us in the comments. Subscribe now, because by the time I'm done with them, even the principal will beg for mercy.
The scissors made a sound like a bone breaking. Snip. A curl of black hair spiraled to the classroom floor, bouncing once before settling near the toe of Kira Malone's sneaker. The room froze. The giggling stopped. Even the teacher's voice trailed off mid-sentence, her chalk hovering over the board like she'd forgotten what she was writing. Kira didn't move. She didn't slap a hand to the ruined patch above her ear where the strands had been chopped jagged. She didn't whirl around to scream at Ashley Whitmore, who was still holding the scissors, her glossy lips parted in mock surprise. Instead, Kira stared at the hair on the floor. It was darker than she remembered. Thicker. Like it didn't belong down there. "Oops," Ashley said, her voice syrup-sweet. "Guess it was sharper than I thought." One of her friends, Megan, the one with the horsey laugh, snorted into her hand. The other, Danny, bit her lip like she was trying not to smile. Kira lifted her head. Slowly. Ashley's smirk faltered. Maybe it was the way Kira's shoulders didn't tense. Maybe it was the way her fingers, resting on the desk, didn't even twitch. Or maybe it was her eyes. Flat. Empty. Like the calm before something terrible. "You shouldn't have done that," Kira said. Ashley rolled her eyes. "God, relax. It's just hair. It'll grow." Kira stood up. The chair didn't screech. It didn't clatter. It just moved. Like she'd floated out of it. And that's when Ashley took a step back. A whisper cut through the room. "Wait, isn't she that girl who used to fight?" Kira didn't hear it. Or maybe she did and didn't care. All she saw was the way Ashley's knuckles whitened around the scissors. The way Megan's smile vanished. The way Danny's eyes darted toward the door like she was calculating how fast she could run. Ashley lifted her chin. "What, you gonna cry now?" Kira smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "No," she said. "I'm gonna teach you a lesson." Flashback. 3 years earlier. The crowd screamed as the boy hit the mat. He was twice her size. Thick-necked. Red-faced. His teeth were gritted, his fists clenched, and his coach had been yelling from the sidelines that he couldn't let some little girl beat him. Kira, 12 years old and already a storm in human form, wiped blood from her lip and grinned. The boy lunged. She sidestepped, hooked his arm, and twisted. His shoulder popped. The ref blew the whistle. The crowd lost their minds. And as the boy whimpered on the ground, Kira leaned down and whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." Present day. The first hit was a palm strike to the nose. Ashley's head snapped back. Blood spurted. The scissors clattered to the floor. Megan shrieked. Danny lunged. Kira swept her legs out from under her. Danny crashed into a desk, gasping. Megan scrambled backward, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Ashley, clutching her face, stumbled into the blackboard. You freak!" she spat, blood dripping between her fingers. Kira stepped over the scissors. Ashley flinched. "You thought this was funny," Kira said, her voice quiet. "You thought I'd just take it." Ashley's breath hitched. Kira reached down and grabbed a fistful of Ashley's perfect blonde hair. The class gasped. Ashley whimpered. Kira yanked her close. "How does it feel?" Ashley's eyes watered. "Pete, please." Kira let go. Ashley collapsed, sobbing. The room was dead silent. Kira picked up the scissors. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then she tossed them onto the teacher's desk. "I'm not like you," she said, and walked out. Ashley's scream followed her into the hall. "You're dead, Malone." Kira didn't look back. "No," she murmured. "You just woke me up. And I don't go back to sleep." The principal's office smelled like old coffee and regret. Kira sat perfectly still in the hard plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap. Principal Higgins hadn't even looked up from his paperwork yet. The clock above his desk ticked louder than it should have. The door burst open. Ashley stormed in, her nose swollen and taped, followed by a man in a suit that cost more than Kira's entire wardrobe. His tie was knotted so tight it looked like it was choking him. "That's her." Ashley pointed, her voice shrill. "She attacked me." Mr. Whitmore's eyes locked onto Kira. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Kira blinked slowly. "Should I?" The principal finally looked up. "Mr. Whitmore is on the school board, Kira. And a major donor too." "I don't care." Kira's voice stayed flat. "She cut my hair first." Ashley's father slammed his palm on the desk. "Where are your parents?" "I want them here now." Kira's fingers twitched. "Just once." "My mom's in the hospital." For half a second, the room got quieter. Then Ashley smirked, probably sick of looking at. Kira was out of her chair before she realized she'd moved. Principal Higgins jumped between them. "Enough. Kira, you're suspended for 3 days. Ashley, 1 day." Mr. Whitmore's face turned purple. "That's unacceptable. My daughter was assaulted." The principal wouldn't meet Kira's eyes. "Take the suspension, Kira, or it's expulsion." Ashley's smile widened as Kira walked out. The whispers started before she even reached the hallway. "Crazy bitch. Did you see what she did to Ashley? Someone needs to put her down." Kira kept walking. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from the only number that ever texted her anymore. "Nurse Patel, your mother had another episode. She asked for you." The bus ride to the hospital took 27 minutes. Kira counted every one. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way they had 3 years ago when the doctors first said the word degenerative, and her mother's hands had started shaking. Room 412 smelled like antiseptic and the lavender lotion Kira brought every week. Her mother was staring out the window, her shoulders thinner than last visit, her braids streaked with more gray. "Hey, Mom." Her mother didn't turn. "You fought today." Kira's throat tightened. "How did you?" "I always know." Finally, she turned. Her eyes were cloudy but sharp. "Show me the damage." Kira bent her head. Her mother's fingers, still gentle despite the tremors, touched the chopped strands. "Who?" "Ashley Whitmore." Her mother's breath caught. "Charles Whitmore's daughter?" Kira nodded. Her mother closed her eyes. "Oh, baby. You picked the wrong enemy." "I didn't pick anything. I know what she did." Her mother's voice cracked. "But that family, they don't lose." Kira took her mother's shaking hands. "Neither do we." The heart monitor beeped in the silence. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed. When her mother spoke again, it was barely a whisper. "Go see Javier." Kira froze. She hadn't said that name in 3 years. Not since the last fight. Not since the night everything went wrong. Her mother's grip tightened. "You're going to need him." The gym smelled like sweat and rust. The heavy bag still hung in the far corner, duct tape covering the split where Kira had kicked it too hard that last summer. The ring was gone. So were the trophies. Javier stood with his back to her, wrapping another kid's hands. His hair was grayer, his shoulders more hunched, but his voice was the same. "Elbows in, dumbass. You're not swatting flies." Kira cleared her throat. Javier turned. His rap job faltered. 4-5 full seconds. Nobody breathed. Then, "Well, look what the cat dragged in." The kid glanced between them. "Who's out?" Javier didn't blink. "Now." When the door slammed shut, Javier crossed his arms. "Suspended or expelled?" Kira didn't answer. Javier snorted. "Still got that mouth on you, huh? Your mom. Hospital. Damn." He rubbed his face. "And now you're here because..." "Ashley Whitmore cut my hair." Javier went very still. "Charles Whitmore's kid." Kira nodded. Javier exhaled long and slow. "You got a death wish, Mija? She started it. They always do." Javier tossed her a pair of wraps. "Show me what you remember." Kira caught them automatically. Her fingers remembered the motion before her brain did. Wrap, twist, tuck, just like riding a bike. Javier nodded at the heavy bag. Let's see it. The first punch felt like coming home. The bag barely swayed. Javier sighed. Pathetic. Kira gritted her teeth. The second punch landed harder. Warmer. The third punch made the chains creak. Javier grinned. There she is. Kira didn't realize she was crying until the tears hit her wrapped hands. Javier pretended not to notice. Whitmore's kid won't stop. You know that, right? Kira wiped her face on her shoulder. I know. Good. Javier tossed her a mouthguard. Then let's get to work. Meanwhile, across town, Ashley pressed the ice pack to her nose while her father paced. I want her gone, Daddy. Mr. Whitmore scrolled through his contacts. She will be. The name he stopped on, Detective Mark Reyes. Ashley smiled. The swelling made it hurt. She didn't care. Make it hurt. Her father hit call. Oh, I will. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets in the precinct hallway. Detective Mark Reyes adjusted his tie in the reflection of his badge, the same way he had every morning for 15 years. The call from Charles Whitmore had come in at exactly 3:17 p.m. He'd known before answering what it would be about. The interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and regret. Kira sat with her back straight, her hands folded on the metal table. No fidgeting. No nervous glances at the two-way mirror. Just that same unnerving calm. Reyes dropped a file in front of her. It landed with a slap. You know why you're here? Kira glanced at the file. Because Ashley Whitmore cries pretty for cops? Reyes didn't smile. Assault. Destruction of property. Possible gang affiliation. That made her laugh. A short, sharp sound. Gang affiliation? Really? Reyes flipped open the file. A photo of Ashley's bruised face stared up at them. You did this. Kira leaned forward just enough to make the cuffs rattle. After she cut my hair. In front of 30 witnesses. Witnesses say you escalated. Witnesses lie. Reyes sighed and pulled out another photo. This one was older. Grainy. A 12-year-old girl in a boxing ring. Her fist raised in victory. This you. Kira's jaw tightened. You were good, Reyes continued. Junior champ. Then poof, you vanished. He tapped the photo. Why? Kira stared past him. Life happened. Life. Reyes leaned back. Or the night Javier Torres' gym got raided? Kira's fingers twitched. Reyes smiled. Yeah, I know Javier. And I know what really happened that night. He lowered his voice. I also know Charles Whitmore owns the judge who'll hear your case. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. Kira finally looked at him. What do you want? Reyes slid a business card across the table. Your mom's sick. Medical bills piling up. Kira didn't touch the card. Get to the point. Fight for me, Reyes said. One match. Underground. No rules. Kira's laugh was ice. You're a cop. And you're broke. Reyes stood. Think about it. Or don't. Either way, you walk out of here tonight. He paused at the door. But the next time Ashley comes for you, you won't. The bus ride home took 36 minutes. Kira counted each one. The card burned in her pocket. Her apartment was dark. The fridge hummed louder than it should have. She tossed the card on the counter and opened her mother's medical folder. The numbers hadn't changed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One word. Check your porch. Kira peered through the peephole. Nothing. She opened the door and nearly stepped on a box. No label. Just a single strand of blonde hair taped to the lid. Inside, a pair of scissors. And a note in looping handwriting. Round 2 starts soon. Kira closed the box. Then she picked up Reyes' card. And dialed. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Estate Asterisk, Ashley painted her nails blood red while her father poured scotch. She'll never take the deal. Charles Whitmore smiled. I'm counting on it. The detective's voice crackled through the speakerphone. She just called. Ashley blew on her nails. Told you. Her father sipped his drink. Good. Then we proceed with Phase 2. The rain slapped against the bus windows as Kira rode across town. The address on Rhea's card led to an abandoned meatpacking district, the streetlights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to stay alive or give up. She counted the cracks in the sidewalk as she walked, 37 to the rusted metal door. The bouncer didn't ask for ID, just looked her up and down and smirked. "You lost, little girl?" Kira met his eyes. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The door creaked open to a wall of sound. Cheering, shouting, the wet smack of flesh hitting flesh. The warehouse stank of sweat, blood, and something metallic underneath. Chains rattled as two fighters circled a cage. Not a ring. No ropes. No corners. Just four walls and a concrete floor. Reyes leaned against the cage, sipping something amber. "Took you long enough." Kira didn't blink. "You said one fight." "One fight." He gestured to the cage where a fighter spat out a tooth. 10 grand if you win. Medical bills paid either way." The crowd roared as someone hit the ground hard. Kira watched the way the victor didn't celebrate, just wiped his bloody knuckles on his shorts and walked away like it was another day at the office. "Who would I be fighting?" Reyes smiled. "Someone who deserves what's coming to them." A door slammed upstairs. Through the chain-link fencing of the catwalk, Kira saw Charles Whitmore shaking hands with a man in a suit. Her stomach dropped when the suit turned. Javier. Older. Harder. But unmistakably him. Javier's eyes locked onto hers across the warehouse. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then he leaned in and whispered something to Whitmore, who immediately looked down at Kira with a grin that made her fists clench. Reyes followed her gaze. "Problem." Kira turned back to the cage where fresh blood streaked the concrete. "When do I start?" "Tonight." Reyes pressed a cold bottle of water into her hand. "Against their new rising star. Undefeated. Brutal. Fights under the name." "Let me guess." Kira cut him off, watching as Whitmore and Javier disappeared into a private booth. "Something clever like the Reaper?" Reyes chuckled. "Worse. They call him the dentist, because he always pulls the teeth." The crowd suddenly surged toward a side entrance. Kira stood on her toes to see, and froze. Ashley Whitmore strutted through the crowd in a white fur coat, leading a mountain of a man by a chain around his neck. His face was hidden by a black mask, but the way he moved, like a machine built for breaking things, sent a ripple through the room. Ashley's laugh cut through the noise as she spotted Kira. She made a show of whispering in the dentist's ear, then pointed straight at her. Reyes sighed. "I may have left out one detail." The dentist ripped off his mask. Kira's breath caught. The last time she'd seen that face, it was 12 years old and grinning at her across a boxing ring. Tommy, the Tank Rivera. Her first real opponent. Her first real win. Now his nose was crooked from too many breaks, his teeth filed to sharp points, and his eyes, empty. Like whatever made him human had been carved out long ago. Tommy's voice was gravel. "Hello, Storm." The nickname from her fighting days hit like a gut punch. Kira's hands tingled. Not with fear, but something worse. Recognition. Ashley twirled the chain around her fingers. "Small world, huh? Daddy bought him after your little match ruined his career." She patted Tommy's cheek. Took years to rebuild him proper. Tommy didn't flinch, just stared at Kira with dead eyes. Reyes shifted uncomfortably. The terms changed. "Now it's a death match," Ashley finished, smiling sweetly. "No rounds, no taps, only one walks out." She leaned in, her perfume cloying. "Unless you want to apologize. On your knees." The warehouse held its breath. Kira looked at Tommy. Really looked. Saw the scars around his wrists from restraints. The way his left knee barely bent. This wasn't a fighter. This was a broken thing Whitmore had glued back together wrong. She turned to Reyes. "You set me up." He had the decency to look ashamed. "They own the judges, Kira. The cops. The cage." She finished for him, staring at the blood-stained concrete. Then she did something that made Ashley's smile die. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a scared one. The kind of laugh that starts deep in your gut when you realize the joke's been on you this whole time. Kira wiped her eyes. Okay. Ashley blinked. Okay. Okay, I'll fight. Kira started wrapping her hands with the tape Reyes offered. But I want new terms. Whitmore's voice boomed from the balcony. You're in no position to negotiate. Kira didn't look up. If I win, Tommy goes free. The warehouse erupted. Tommy's head snapped up, something like hope flickering in his dead eyes. Whitmore chuckled. And if you lose? Kira finally met his gaze. Then I won't be around to care. Ashley opened her mouth to protest, but her father raised a hand. Deal. He signaled to the announcer. Let's give the people what they paid for. As the crowd cheered, Reyes caught Kira's arm. You can't win this. She shook him off. You'd be surprised what I can do. The cage door clanged shut behind her. Tommy cracked his neck. The bell rang, and for the first time in 3 years, Kira Malone stopped holding back. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Kira circled Tommy in the cage. His breathing was ragged, his movements mechanical, like a wind-up toy someone had overwound. The crowd's screams faded to a dull roar in her ears. Tommy lunged first. His right hook came slower than she remembered, but with twice the power. Kira ducked, feeling the air move above her head as his fist sailed past. She countered with a sharp jab to his ribs. The sound of knuckles connecting with flesh echoed through the warehouse. Remember our first fight? Kira sidestepped another punch. You talked trash the whole time. Tommy's eyes stayed blank. He swung again. This time his fist grazed her cheek, splitting the skin. Warm blood trickled down her face. The metallic taste filled her mouth as she spat on the concrete. What did they do to you, Tommy? No response. Just another bone-rattling punch that sent her stumbling back into the cage wall. The chain links dug into her shoulders. Somewhere beyond the cage, Ashley's laughter rang out. Kira saw the opening. Tommy's left side sagged slightly with each breath. Old injury. Badly healed. She feinted right, then drove her elbow into his ribs with a sickening crack. Tommy finally made a sound. A wet, pained grunt. But he didn't slow down. His meaty hands grabbed her shoulders and slammed her into the ground. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Through the spots in her vision, Kira saw him raise one massive fist for the finishing blow. Then she saw something else. The faintest tremor in his fingers. The barest flicker in his dead eyes. She rolled at the last second. Tommy's fist cratered the concrete where her head had been. Before he could recover, Kira scrambled up and wrapped her arm around his neck in a chokehold. Listen to me, she hissed in his ear as he thrashed. That night at Javier's gym. It wasn't an accident. Tommy's struggling slowed. Just slightly. The raid. The fire. Kira tightened her grip. Whitmore set it up because we wouldn't throw fights for him. The crowd was on their feet now, screaming for blood. Kira could feel Tommy's pulse hammering against her forearm. Your parents, she whispered. They told you we left you there, didn't they? Tommy went completely still. It's not true. Kira's voice broke. We came back. They wouldn't let us through. For one heartbeat, two, nothing happened. Then Tommy's hand came up, not to strike, but to grip her forearm. His fingers tapped once, twice, a pattern they'd used as kids to signal surrender. The bell rang. Kira released him immediately. Tommy collapsed to his knees, gasping. The crowd erupted in boos. Fight! Someone screamed. Finish him! Another voice shouted. Kira stood between Tommy and the crowd, arms raised. It's over. Charles Whitmore's voice cut through the noise. The deal was only one walks out. Kira turned to face the balcony. You want someone dead? She pointed at Whitmore. Come do it yourself. The warehouse went silent. Even Ashley stopped smiling. Then the fire alarm went off. Smoke poured from the stairwell leading to Whitmore's private booth. People screamed, pushing toward the exits in a panic. Through the chaos, Kira saw Reyes shoving his way toward the cage with a fire extinguisher. Tommy grabbed her wrist. Run! His voice was hoarse from the chokehold. They'll kill you. Kira hauled him to his feet. Not today. They stumbled through the smoke toward a side exit. Behind them, the sounds of fighting erupted. Not the organized violence of the cage, but the chaotic brawling of terrified men. Glass shattered. Someone screamed about cops. The alley outside was pitch black. Kira dragged Tommy behind a dumpster just as the first police cruiser screeched to a stop out front. Tommy coughed, spitting blood onto the pavement. Why? Kira watched shadows move past the alley mouth. Because nobody owns me. She stood, offering him a hand. And nobody owns you either. Sirens wailed in the distance. Closer now. Tommy looked at her hand, then up at her face. For the first time in years, his eyes looked alive. Where to? He asked. Kira smiled. Somewhere they'll never find us. The alley reeked of rotting garbage and diesel fumes as Kira pressed them both against the damp brick wall. Police radios crackled just around the corner, the blue lights painting the puddles in swirling flashes. Tommy's breathing came in ragged gulps, his massive frame trembling not from exhaustion but from something deeper, the first tremors of waking up after years in a nightmare. Keep still, Kira whispered, her hand pressed against his heaving chest. She could feel his heartbeat thundering beneath her palm, fast as a cornered animal's. A flashlight beam sliced across the alley entrance. They both held their breath. The beam lingered for 3 agonizing seconds before moving on. Tommy's fingers dug into her arm. They'll check the cameras, he rasped. Whitmore owns half the cops in this precinct. Kira peered around the dumpster. The chaos at the warehouse had drawn every available unit. She counted at least 6 cruisers, their doors left hanging open as officers struggled to contain the fleeing crowd. Perfect distraction. Follow my lead. She grabbed Tommy's wrist and pulled him deeper into the shadows. They moved like ghosts through the labyrinth of backstreets, past boarded-up storefronts and rusted fire escapes. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, replaced by the distant wail of more sirens heading toward the warehouse. After 6 blocks, Kira ducked into a narrow passage between 2 tenement buildings. The air here smelled of mildew and stale urine. She stopped at a rusted metal door with no visible handle and knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The peephole darkened. Chains rattled. The door creaked open to reveal a wizened old woman squinting up at them through thick glasses. Her gaze flicked from Kira's bloody face to Tommy's hulking form, then back. Without a word, she stepped aside. The apartment was smaller than a jail cell, crammed with stacks of yellowed newspapers and smelling strongly of mothballs and garlic. The old woman shuffled to a hot plate and began heating a kettle. Sit, she commanded in heavily accented English, before you bleed on my floor. Tommy swayed on his feet. Kira guided him to a rickety kitchen chair that groaned under his weight. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind the full extent of their injuries. Kira's split cheek, Tommy's cracked ribs, the myriad of smaller cuts and bruises from the fight. The old woman returned with a steaming bowl of water and a rag. She worked in silence, cleaning Kira's face with surprising gentleness before moving to Tommy. He flinched when she touched his side. Broken? She asked. Tommy shook his head. Old injury. Never healed right. The woman made a disapproving noise and began wrapping his ribs with strips of torn sheet. Fools, she muttered. Always breaking good boys. Kira watched the careful way the woman's gnarled fingers worked. You know who we are. The woman snorted. I know Javier sends me his broken birds. She tied off the bandage with a sharp tug. You stay tonight. Tomorrow you go. She disappeared behind a flowered curtain that presumably led to her bedroom, leaving them alone with a pot of strong tea and a plate of hard biscuits. Tommy stared at his hands, the knuckles permanently swollen from years of fighting. She's right, he said quietly. We can't stay. Kira sipped the bitter tea. We're not running. You don't understand. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. Whitmore doesn't just own the cops. He owns judges, politicians, half the city council. His hands clenched into fists. And now he owns a piece of Reyes too. The teacup trembled in Kira's grip. Outside, a car alarm hooped briefly before being silenced. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried. We hit back, Kira said at last. Not at his fighters. Not at his businesses. She met Tommy's eyes. We go after what really matters to him. Tommy frowned. His money. Kira shook her head. His reputation. A slow understanding dawned in Tommy's eyes. For the first time in years, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. Ashley. Kira nodded. Tomorrow's the mayor's fundraiser at the Grand Meridian. All the society pages will be there. She set down her cup. Time to show the world what the Whitmores really are. Behind the curtain, the old woman's alarm clock buzzed softly. The city outside continued unaware, the night buses rumbling past, the late shift workers trudging home, the oblivious rhythm of a world about to change. Tommy flexed his newly bandaged hands. I know the hotel layout. Worked security there last year. Kira smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then let's get to work. The first light of dawn painted the rooftops outside as they began to plan. Somewhere across town, Charles Whitmore was probably giving orders to his men, confident in his control of the city. He wouldn't be confident for long. The Grand Meridian's ballroom glittered like a gilded cage. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting prisms of light across the assembled elite. Kira adjusted the high collar of her server's uniform, the starched fabric scratching at the fresh stitches along her jawline. Tommy stood rigid by the kitchen doors in his borrowed security blazer. The earpiece coiled around his ear, making him look almost legitimate. His fingers kept twitching toward the hidden pocket where they'd stashed the thumb drive. 3 weeks of covert surveillance showing Whitmore's dealings with Reyes, the underground fights, even the medical reports proving Tommy had been drugged into compliance for years. Eyes up, Kira murmured as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. Whitmore just arrived. Charles Whitmore cut through the crowd like a shark through shallow water. His tuxedo worth more than most people's cars. Ashley trailed behind him in a couture gown the color of fresh blood, her smile sharp enough to draw its own. Kira moved through the tables, memorizing sightlines. The mayor's podium stood flanked by 2 massive projection screens, currently displaying bland corporate logos for the fundraiser sponsors. In 12 minutes, those screens would show something far more interesting. A hand grabbed her elbow. These need refilling. Ashley thrust a half-empty champagne flute at her, not bothering to look up from her phone. When Kira didn't immediately take it, Ashley's gaze snapped up. Her perfectly lined eyes widened. Kira watched the realization dawn, the split-second delay before Ashley's manicured fingers tightened around the glass. You! Miss Whitmore! Kira plucked the flute from her grasp with a server's practiced smile. So nice to see you again. Ashley's mouth opened, no doubt to scream for security, but Tommy was already there, a mountain in a black suit gently steering her away. This way, miss. Your father needs you. Kira checked her watch. 8 minutes. She slipped through the kitchen doors where a skinny tech kid they'd paid in cash was already crouched by the AV system, his fingers flying across a hacked-together device. It's ready, he whispered, sweat beading on his upper lip. Just say the word. Outside, the mayor was droning on about civic responsibility. Whitmore stood nearby, shaking hands like a man without a care in the world. Tommy had positioned Ashley between 2 off-duty cops who had no idea they were guarding a prisoner instead of a socialite. Kira took a deep breath. Do it. The screens flickered. For one glorious second, the ballroom was utterly silent as Whitmore's own voice boomed through the speakers. Nobody cares about some dead Mexican kid, followed by CCTV footage of him handing Reyes an envelope thick with cash. Then the medical reports flashed up. Then Tommy's bruised face staring blankly at a syringe. Chaos erupted. Whitmore lunged for the podium, shouting at the text to kill the feed. The mayor recoiled like he'd been burned. Reporters, bless their opportunistic hearts, were already filming the screens with their phones. But the masterpiece was Ashley. The footage switched to her locker room at the country club, her voice crystal clear. Daddy will bury you just like he buried those boxers from the west side. Then the kicker, her laughing as she snipped the first lock of Kira's hair. Kira shed her server's jacket as she moved toward the emergency exit. Behind her, Whitmore was screaming at his PR team. The veneer of civility shattered. Tommy fell into step beside her, his security earpiece still dangling absurdly from one ear. They hit the alley just as the first police cruisers arrived. Real cops this time, the kind who couldn't be bought. Kira didn't stay to watch the arrests. She had one more stop to make. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Kira's mother slept peacefully, her braids fanned across the pillow. On the bedside table, a small TV played muted coverage of the fundraiser scandal. Tommy waited in the hallway, giving them space. Kira gently took her mother's hand, the one without the 4, and pressed the remote into her palm. "Wake up, Mom," she whispered. "We won." Outside, dawn was breaking over the city. Somewhere, Charles Whitmore was learning what it felt like to be powerless. Somewhere, Ashley was finally discovering consequences. And somewhere in between, Kira Malone stood tall, her hair growing back, her fists unclenched at last. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and the lavender lotion Kira had brought last Tuesday. Her mother's hand felt fragile in hers, the veins standing out like rivers on a map. The muted TV flickered with images of Whitmore being escorted from the Grand Meridian by stone-faced officers. His designer suit jacket draped over his cuffed wrists. Kira's thumb brushed across her mother's knuckles. "You should have seen his face," she whispered. "All that money, all that power, and he couldn't stop it." The heart monitor beeped steadily. Too steadily. Kira had memorized every dip and spike of that rhythm over the past 6 months. And this wasn't right. This was the flat line before the storm. "Mom!" The door hissed open behind her. Tommy filled the doorway, his bulk blocking most of the fluorescent hallway light. "Kira!" His voice had that tone, the one he used right before a fight turned ugly. She didn't turn around. Not now. They found the backup files. Tommy stepped inside, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Reyes talked. "The feds are raiding all of Whitmore's properties." On the TV, Ashley's tear-streaked face appeared, mascara running down her cheeks as reporters shouted questions about the underground fights. Kira reached for the remote and turned it off. Her mother's fingers twitched. Kira's breath caught. "Mom!" Eyelids fluttered. A dry tongue darted out to wet, cracked lips. Then, so soft Kira almost missed it, "Did we win?" Tommy made a choked sound behind her. Kira leaned forward until her forehead touched her mother's shoulder, the hospital gown scratchy against her skin. "Yeah, Mom. We won." The heart monitor skipped. Then skipped again. Kira's head snapped up as the machine began its shrill alarm. Footsteps pounded down the hall. Tommy was already at the door, bellowing for help. Her mother's hand tightened around hers with sudden, shocking strength. "Not done." The words came out in a gasp. "Safe deposit box." Then the room exploded with nurses. Kira was shoved aside. Her mother's hand ripped from hers as the crash cart rattled in. A doctor barked orders. Someone yelled, "Clear!" and the body on the bed arched violently. Tommy grabbed Kira's shoulders before her knees could give out. "We need to move," he murmured in her ear. "Now!" She dug her heels in. "I'm not leaving her." The heart monitor screamed its relentless tone. The doctor looked up, face grim. "One more shock." Tommy's grip tightened. "The safe deposit box, Kira. Whatever she was trying to tell you. Clear." The body jolted again. The line stayed flat. Kira's vision tunneled. The sounds of the code blue faded beneath a roaring in her ears. She barely felt Tommy steering her out of the room, down the hall, into the elevator. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was a nurse pulling a white sheet up over her mother's face. The bank vault smelled like cold metal and old money. Kira's hands shook as she turned the key in box 417. Inside lay a single manila envelope, brittle with age. Tommy stood guard at the door, his bulk blocking the security camera's view. The first photo slid into her hands, a younger version of her mother standing beside a boxing ring, arm in arm with a man Kira recognized instantly. Javier. But not the broken man they'd left behind at the warehouse. This Javier was grinning, his arms around 2 little girls, one with wild curls Kira would know anywhere, the other with Ashley Whitmore's distinctive upturned nose. "What the hell?" Kira whispered. The next document was a birth certificate. Father: Charles Whitmore. Mother: Letitia Malone. Child: Ashley Nicole Whitmore Malone. The floor dropped out from under her. The dates lined up perfectly. Her mother had worked for Whitmore as a personal trainer before Kira was born. Before he'd thrown her out when she got pregnant. Before he'd taken the baby and paid her mother to disappear. Tommy's shadow fell across the papers. Jesus Christ. Kira's fingers found the last item. A faded newspaper clipping about a fire at a boxing gym. The date matched the night she'd last fought. The night Tommy had disappeared. The night everything changed. Her voice came out strangled. She wasn't just my coach. Tommy's jaw worked. Ashley's your half-sister. Kira stared at the photo of the two little girls, arms wrapped around each other, grinning like they hadn't a care in the world. Like they didn't know they'd spend the next 15 years trying to destroy each other. The bank's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Kira carefully replaced everything in the envelope, her movements precise, controlled. Tommy shifted uneasily. What now? Kira slid the envelope into her jacket. The photo edges dug into her ribs like a knife. Now we find Ashley before Whitmore does. The vault door clanged shut behind them with finality. Outside, the city sprawled under a slate-gray sky, unaware that the game had just changed again. Somewhere out there, Ashley Whitmore was running scared. Somewhere out there, Charles Whitmore was fighting for his life. And Kira? Kira finally knew exactly who she was fighting for. The rain came down in sheets as Kira sprinted across the parking garage, the manila envelope tucked safely inside her waterproof jacket. Tommy's truck idled near the exit, headlights cutting through the gloom. She yanked open the passenger door just as her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text contained only an address, a run-down motel on the industrial side of town, and a single word: help. Tommy glanced at the screen as Kira buckled in. Trap. Probably. Kira wiped rainwater from her face. But we're going anyway. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm as they crossed town. Neon signs blurred through the downpour, their reflections swimming in oily puddles. Kira's fingers drummed against the envelope in her lap. All these years, all the fights, and Ashley had never known. Tommy took a corner too fast. You think Whitmore knows she reached out? Kira stared at the passing buildings. He knows everything eventually. The motel's vacancy sign flickered erratically. The no burned out so it simply read, vacancy. Room 114's curtain twitched as they pulled up. Kira left the envelope in the truck. The door opened before they could knock. Ashley stood there in a hoodie 3 sizes too big. Her perfect blonde hair now dyed an unconvincing black. Dark circles bruised her eyes. You came. Her voice sounded raw, like she'd been screaming. Kira stepped inside, Tommy close behind. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and fear. A news channel played silently on the TV, footage of Whitmore's arraignment. Ashley paced the stained carpet. He's going to kill me. After what leaked today, she stopped abruptly, noticing how Kira was staring at her. What? Kira reached into her back pocket and tossed the photograph onto the bed. Ashley picked it up with trembling hands. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain pounding on the roof. That's no. Ashley's head snapped up. This is some photoshopped. Birth certificate's in the truck, Kira said quietly. Ashley's knees buckled. She caught herself on the dresser, sending a plastic ice bucket clattering to the floor. All this time, she whispered. The hair, the fights, he knew. Her manicured nails dug into the cheap wood veneer. That sick bastard knew. Tommy moved to block the door, his massive frame a silent warning. You set us up at the warehouse. Ashley barked a laugh that bordered on hysterical. And you think I had a choice? She yanked up her sleeve, revealing a track of needle marks. He's been doping me since I was 14 to keep me compliant. Just like your friend here. She jerked her chin at Tommy. Kira studied her sister's face, really studied it, for the first time. The same slight upturn at the end of her nose. The same stubborn set to her jaw. Different mothers. Same monster of a father. On the TV, Whitmore's smug face filled the screen as he left the courthouse, free on bail. His lips moved soundlessly, but Kira could read them perfectly. This isn't over. Ashley followed her gaze. He'll come for all of us now. Kira picked up the photograph, tracing the image of 2 little girls who didn't know they were sisters. Let him come. Outside, lightning split the sky. Somewhere in the city, Charles Whitmore was regrouping his forces. Somewhere, the cops were still sorting through the evidence. And in a dingy motel room, 3 broken people stared at each other across a chasm of betrayal and blood. Ashley wiped her nose with the back of her hand. So what now? Kira reached into her jacket and tossed her a set of car keys. Now we finish what he started. The motel room's single bulb flickered as thunder rattled the windows. Ashley stared at the keys in her palm like they might bite her. "You're giving me a way out?" Her voice cracked. "After everything?" Kira watched a water stain spread across the ceiling tiles. "Not a way out. A choice." She nodded toward Tommy. "We're going to end this. You can run or you can fight." Ashley's fingers closed around the keys. The metal teeth bit into her skin. For the first time in her life, no one was telling her what to do. No handlers. No daddy. Just the awful, terrifying freedom of choice. The television screen changed to breaking news. A live shot of Whitmore's penthouse. Flames licked at the windows. Ashley's breath hitched. That's my home." Tommy stepped closer to the screen. "Not a fire." His knuckles whitened around the curtain he'd pushed aside. "Smoke bombs. He's destroying evidence." Kira's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Just coordinates and a time. 3 a.m. She showed it to Tommy. "He's moving up the timeline." Ashley made a small, broken sound in her throat. "The compound. He's going to the compound." When they both turned to stare, she swallowed hard. "Upstate. Where he trained us." Her fingers unconsciously went to the track marks on her arm. Rain lashed against the window. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed toward the burning penthouse. Kira studied her sister. The way her shoulders hunched like she was still bracing for blows. The tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with withdrawal. All these years, they'd been mirrors reflecting the same damage in different ways. Kira reached into her jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Their mother's earrings, the only thing of value she'd ever owned. "She would have wanted you to have these." Ashley took the box with shaking hands. The simple pearl studs gleamed in the dim light. I can't. You're her daughter too." Kira turned toward the door. "We leave in 10. The parking lot asphalt shimmered with rain and oil stains. Tommy checked the weapons in the duffel bag while Kira loaded extra magazines. Ashley stood frozen between the truck and a stolen Honda Civic, the keys still digging into her palm. Kira didn't look up from her task. "If you're going, get in. If you're running, go now." Lightning flashed, illuminating the scars on Ashley's arms. Some from needles, some from things far worse. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Weakness is the only sin." The pearls glinted in her other hand. The Civic's alarm chirped as she unlocked it. For a heartbeat, Kira's shoulders tensed. Then Ashley threw the keys into the flooded gutter. "I know the security layout." She grabbed a pistol from the duffel with hands that had stopped shaking. "And where he keeps the blackmail files." Tommy exchanged a glance with Kira. Something unspoken passed between them. He tossed Ashley a bulletproof vest. "Welcome to the team, princess." The engine roared to life as the storm reached its crescendo. Somewhere in the burning penthouse, evidence turned to ash. Somewhere in a government office, a file on Charles Whitmore sat waiting to be opened. And in a run-down motel parking lot, 3 damaged souls made their choice. Not as victims, not as weapons, but as something their enemy would never expect. Family. The truck peeled out into the storm. The highway stretched out before them like a black ribbon, rain slashing across the windshield in waves. Kira gripped the wheel tighter, the hum of the engine vibrating through her bones. Ashley sat shotgun, nervously twisting their mother's pearl earring between her fingers. Tommy was a silent shadow in the back seat, methodically checking each weapon in the duffel bag. Ashley's knee wouldn't stop bouncing. "He'll have the place locked down tight," she muttered. "Motion sensors, pressure plates, armed guards." "Breathe," Kira said, not taking her eyes off the road. "We know." Tommy racked the slide of a pistol. "Question is, do you?" His eyes met Ashley's in the rearview mirror. "You ready to pull the trigger when it counts?" The pearls dug into Ashley's palm. She remembered the first time her father had put a gun in her hand at 12 years old. How he'd laughed when she flinched at the recoil. "I won't freeze." Kira took an exit ramp too fast, tires squealing. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the skeletal outlines of pine trees clawing at the stormy sky. A sign flashed by, "Whitmore Estates, private property, 5 miles." Tommy leaned forward, his voice low. "We need a real plan." Not just kicking in the front door. Ashley's fingers flew across her phone. There's a service entrance here. She zoomed in on a satellite image. For landscaping crews. No cameras. Kira's jaw tightened. How do you know? Because I used it to sneak out when I was 15. Ashley's smile was brittle. Before the trackers got implanted, a silence fell over the car. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the downpour. Kira flexed her fingers on the wheel, the scars from countless fights standing out white in the dashboard lights. Tommy broke the quiet. We get in, we get the files, we get out. No heroics. Ashley laughed. A sharp, broken sound. You don't understand. He won't keep the evidence just lying around. She took a shaky breath. There's a vault. Biometric locks. Needs his. She trailed off, pressing her fingers to her right eye. Kira's stomach dropped. He keyed it to your retina. Not just mine. Ashley's voice was barely audible over the rain. Yours too. The truck swerved slightly as the words hit home. Kira's knuckles went white on the wheel. All these years, all the fights, and her father had kept her in his system like some backup key. Tommy's hand came down on Kira's shoulder. We can use this. Lightning flashed, illuminating the wrought iron gates ahead. The security booth stood empty, the barrier arm already raised. Too easy. Kira slowed the truck, her instincts screaming. Ashley stiffened. That's not right. There should be. The first bullet shattered the rear window. Tommy roared as glass sprayed across the back seat. Kira slammed the accelerator before the second shot could find its mark. The truck fishtailed on the wet pavement, tires screaming. Down! Kira yanked Ashley below the dash as more gunfire peppered the tailgate. Tommy returned fire through the broken window, his shots precise even as the truck swerved. Ambush! They knew we were coming. Ashley's breath came in ragged gasps. No, 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 the phone. The text wasn't from the feds. It was from him. She clawed at her pockets. He tracked us. Kira took a curve too fast, the truck riding up on two wheels before crashing back down. The compound gates loomed ahead, lights blazing. More muzzle flashes winked from the tree line. Tommy ducked as a bullet took out the side mirror. We need to bail. Now. Kira's eyes locked onto a service road barely visible through the downpour. Hold on. She yanked the wheel hard left, sending the truck plowing through a chain-link fence. The impact jarred their teeth as they crashed into the darkness beyond. The engine sputtered as they careened down a steep embankment. Kira fought the wheel, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. The truck finally skidded to a stop in a muddy creek bed, steam rising from the hood. Silence. Just the drumming rain and their ragged breathing. Ashley was the first to speak. He played us. Her voice was hollow. All of it, the arrest, the fire, just to draw us out. Tommy checked his pistol. So what now? Kira turned to look at her sister. Really look at her. The pearls still clutched in one hand, the other shaking with adrenaline. Not the perfect princess. Not the vicious bully. Just another one of Whitmore's broken toys. Kira reached over and pried the pearls from Ashley's grip. With deliberate movements, she fastened one to her own earlobe, then reached to do the same for Ashley. Their eyes met in the dim light. Now, Kira said softly, we show him what happens when his weapons turn against him. The second earring clicked into place. Somewhere above them in the storm, sirens wailed. The game had changed again. But this time, the rules were theirs to make. The cold mud seeped through Kira's jeans as she crouched behind the fallen oak tree. Rainwater dripped from the branches overhead, mixing with the blood trickling down her temple from where the rearview mirror had shattered. Beside her, Ashley's breathing came in short, panicked bursts, the adrenaline crash setting in. Tommy moved like a shadow through the trees ahead, scouting the perimeter. He returned minutes later, his face grim in the dim glow of the compound's floodlights. 4 guards patrolling the east side, he murmured. 2 more at the service entrance. All armed. Ashley wiped rain from her face. There's another way in. Her voice was steadier now, edged with something dark. The old storm tunnels. Daddy had them sealed when I was 12, but... She hesitated. I know where the weak points are. Kira studied her sister's face, the way her jaw set when she lied, the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. This wasn't just about getting in. This was about something else. Why? Kira asked quietly. Ashley's fingers twitched toward the pearl earring. Because he kept things down there. Tommy shifted, his boots sinking into the mud. What kind of things? Ashley didn't answer. Just turned and started moving through the underbrush, her sodden sneakers silent on the wet earth. The storm drain entrance was half buried under years of overgrowth, the rusted grate barely visible beneath the brambles. Tommy wrenched it open with a metallic screech that set Kira's teeth on edge. The darkness beyond smelled of damp concrete and something fouler, something chemical. Ashley hesitated at the threshold, her breath shallow. It's down here. Kira flicked on her flashlight. The beam cut through the black, revealing graffiti-scrawled walls and a narrow tunnel that sloped downward. The air grew colder as they descended, the sound of the rain fading behind them. Then the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Kira's light swept across rows of steel cabinets, their doors dented and rusted. Medical equipment, some modern, some decades old, was shoved against the walls. A surgical table stood in the center, its leather restraints cracked with age. Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "What the hell is this place?" Ashley walked forward, her fingers trailing over the table's edge. "The real training facility." She turned, her face pale in the dim light. "Where he perfected his methods." Kira's stomach twisted. She stepped closer to the nearest cabinet, prying it open with a creak. Files spilled out, dozens of them, each labeled with a name. She picked one at random. Subject: Rivera, Tomas. Her hands shook as she flipped it open. Inside were photographs. Tommy as a child, strapped to that same table, electrodes fixed to his temples. Notes in neat, clinical handwriting detailed reactions to various drugs, pain thresholds, conditioning techniques. Tommy snatched the file from her, his breathing ragged. This was before the fights. Years before. Ashley hugged herself, staring at the floor. He needed test subjects first. Kids no one would miss. She swallowed hard. Orphans. Runaways. The ones no one would ask questions about. Kira's pulse roared in her ears. She turned to the next cabinet, yanking it open. Subject: Malone. Kira. Her own face stared back from a photo. Younger, terrified. Hospital scrubs. And 4 in her arm. Memory slammed into her like a freight train. Asterisk the smell of antiseptic. The cold press of a stethoscope against her chest. Her mother screaming in another room. A man's voice, Whitmore's voice, saying, "She's strong. She'll last longer than the others." Asterisk. Kira staggered back, the file slipping from her fingers. Ashley was at her side in an instant. "You remember." It wasn't a question. Kira's vision swam. "He experimented on me." Tommy was already moving, checking the other cabinets. "There are dozens here. Maybe hundreds." His voice was tight with fury. "This is what we needed. Proof." Ashley shook her head. "It's not enough. He'll burn this place the second he realizes we're here." She grabbed Kira's arm. "But the vault upstairs, it has everything. Financial records, payoffs, names of everyone involved." Kira forced herself to focus. "Then we move now." Tommy stuffed files into the duffel bag. "Guards." Ashley's smile was razor thin. "Let me handle them." She reached into the shadows beneath the surgical table and pulled out a small, rusted key. "I stole this when I was 14. Just in case." Kira recognized it instantly. The same key their mother had kept hidden in her jewelry box. The one she'd whispered about in her fevered hospital dreams. Asterisk, the red door, baby. It's all in the red door. Asterisk. Tommy slung the duffel over his shoulder. "Where does it lead?" Ashley turned toward a narrow staircase at the far end of the chamber, the steps disappearing into darkness. "Up," she said softly. "Right into the heart of the house." The storm raged outside as they climbed, the sound of thunder masking their footsteps. Somewhere above them, Charles Whitmore waited, unaware that his greatest mistakes were coming for him. And this time, they weren't just armed. They were angry. The staircase led to a narrow servants' passage, the walls pressing in close around them. The air smelled of old wood and dust, the floorboards creaking underfoot. Kira moved first, her body tense, every sense on high alert. The pearl earring felt heavy on her lobe, a reminder of the mother they'd both lost. Ashley kept close behind, her fingers brushing the wall for balance. "The vault's in his study," she whispered. "Third floor. But he'll be waiting." Tommy adjusted his grip on the pistol. "Then we don't give him time to react." A muffled voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Whitmore's voice, sharp with command. Kira froze, pressing herself against the wall. Footsteps passed by on the other side of the paneling, then faded. Ashley exhaled shakily. "Servant's stair lets out near the kitchen. From there we can." Kira cut her off with a sharp gesture. Another sound, closer this time. The deliberate click of dress shoes on hardwood. Someone was coming. Tommy raised the pistol, but Kira shook her head. No gunfire. Not yet. The footsteps stopped just outside the hidden door. A pause. Then the scrape of a key in the lock. Kira braced. The door swung open, and a man in a butler's uniform stood frozen in the threshold, a silver tray in his hands. His eyes widened. Ashley reacted first. "James." Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't." The old butler hesitated, his gaze flickering between them. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. "He's in the study," he murmured, "with the security team." Kira didn't relax. "Why help us?" James' expression didn't change. "I served your mother before she left. She was kind to me." He glanced at Ashley. "And I've watched what he's done to you both." A beat of silence. Then Tommy moved past him, checking the hall. "Clear." Ashley touched James' arm. "Get out of the house. Now." The butler nodded once, then disappeared down the stairs. The kitchen was empty, the lights dimmed. Plates of half-eaten food sat abandoned on the counter. Whitmore's dinner interrupted. Kira's skin prickled. He knew they were here. Tommy signaled toward the main hall. Stairs to the third floor. 2 guards at the base. Ashley reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a key fob. Distraction. She pressed the button. Somewhere in the house, an alarm blared. The guards at the stairs snapped to attention, radios crackling as they sprinted toward the noise. Kira didn't wait. She moved. The second floor was a blur of closed doors and expensive art. The third floor landing was empty, the hallway lined with portraits, Whitmore ancestors staring down in silent judgment. At the end of the hall, double doors stood slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap. Kira slowed, every instinct screaming. Too easy. Too quiet. Tommy nudged her shoulder, pointing to the security camera above the door. Its red light dark. Disabled. Ashley's jaw tightened. "He wants us to go in." Kira flexed her fingers. "Then let's not keep him waiting." She pushed the door open. Charles Whitmore stood with his back to them, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the storm. The study was immaculate. Leather-bound books, a mahogany desk, a single painting of a young Ashley above the fireplace. And on the far wall, the red door. Whitmore didn't turn. "I wondered how long it would take you to come home." Kira stepped inside, Tommy and Ashley flanking her. "We're not here for a reunion." Whitmore chuckled. "No, you're here for this." He finally turned, holding up a small remote. The vault's biometric locks are wired to the house's gas lines. One wrong move and... He gestured to the windows. Poof! Ashley's breath hitched. "You'd burn it all down." Whitmore's smile was thin. "I've rebuilt from worse." His gaze settled on Kira. "But I don't think that's why you're really here, is it?" Kira didn't answer. Whitmore sighed, setting the remote on the desk. "You want answers? Fine." He straightened his cuffs. "Your mother was weak. She couldn't handle what I was building. And you," he glanced at Ashley, "you were always too much like her." Ashley flinched. Kira's voice was ice. "You experimented on children." Whitmore waved a hand. "Sacrifices for progress. The weak perish. The strong survive." He tilted his head. You, Kira, survived. Tommy took a step forward, gun raised. Enough talking. Whitmore didn't even blink. Ah, Tomas. Still loyal, even after everything. He smirked. Tell me, do you still wake up screaming from the treatments? Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger. A gunshot rang out. Whitmore staggered back, blood blooming on his shoulder. He stared in shock at Ashley, the pistol in her hand still smoking. Her voice shook. That was for Mom. Whitmore's face darkened. You ungrateful little. Kira moved. She crossed the room in 3 strides and drove her fist into his jaw. Whitmore crashed into the desk, sending papers flying. He snarled, swinging wildly, but Kira dodged, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard. Tommy was already at the red door, pressing Ashley's hand to the biometric scanner. The locks disengaged with a hiss. Inside, rows of files lined the walls. Hard drives. Blackmail. Proof of everything. Whitmore laughed through bloody teeth. You think this changes anything? The world belongs to men like me. You're just... Kira kicked him in the ribs. Shut up. Ashley grabbed a hard drive, hands trembling. We have it. Let's go. Whitmore's laugh turned into a cough. Run then. But I'll find you. I'll always find you. Kira looked down at him. This broken, wretched man who had haunted their lives for so long. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo from the safe deposit box. The one of the 2 little girls, smiling and unbroken. She dropped it onto his chest. No, she said softly. You won't. Tommy grabbed the files. Ashley took the hard drives. And as the storm raged outside, they left Charles Whitmore bleeding on the floor of his own study, surrounded by the ghosts of his sins. The house was silent as they descended the stairs. No guards. No alarms. Just the distant wail of sirens growing closer. James waited at the back door, a single suitcase at his feet. The police are coming. I called them. Ashley hesitated. You didn't have to do that. James smiled faintly. Yes, I did. Kira glanced back at the house one last time. Lightning flashed, illuminating the silhouette of Whitmore at the study window, watching them go. But for the first time in her life, Kira didn't feel his shadow looming over her. She turned away and stepped into the rain. The rain had turned to a fine mist by the time they reached the truck, the kind that clung to skin and clothes like a second layer. Kira cranked the engine, her fingers stiff with cold and adrenaline. Tommy tossed the duffel bag of files onto the back seat while Ashley clutched the hard drives to her chest like they might disappear if she let go. The headlights cut through the fog as they pulled away from Whitmore's estate, the sirens now close enough to see flashing blues through the trees. Kira didn't look back. Ashley exhaled shakily, her breath fogging the window. Where now? Kira tightened her grip on the wheel. Somewhere he can't reach us. Tommy checked the rear-view mirror. They'll freeze his assets. Launch an investigation. He's done. Ashley shook her head. You don't know him like I do. He's got contingencies. People loyal to him everywhere. Kira didn't answer. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. The safe house was a run-down cabin 3 hours north, tucked deep in the woods where the trees grew too close to the road. Tommy had found it years ago, back when he was still running from Whitmore's men. Inside, the air smelled of pine and damp wood. A single bulb flickered above the kitchen table where they spread out the files, the hard drives humming as they uploaded to a secure server. Ashley traced a finger over a photograph, a younger Whitmore shaking hands with men in military uniforms. He was always connected, even back then. Kira studied a medical report, her stomach turning at the clinical descriptions of subject responses to various drugs. This goes beyond just us. Beyond just fighting. Tommy leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Human experimentation. Illegal arms deals. Payoffs to half the city council. He nodded to the hard drives. Enough here to bury him forever. Ashley bit her lip. If it gets out. Kira looked up. It will. A silence settled over them, heavy with the weight of what they'd uncovered. Outside, an owl called, the sound echoing through the trees. Ashley suddenly stood, chair scraping against the floor. I need air. The porch creaked under her steps. Kira watched through the window as Ashley sank onto the top step, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Tommy sighed. She's not wrong, you know. Whitmore's got friends in high places. Kira folded the medical report shut. Then we go higher. Ashley didn't turn when Kira sat beside her. The forest stretched out before them, a sea of shadows under the moonlight. You okay? Kira asked. Ashley barked a laugh. Yeah, just peachy. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. All this time, I thought he was molding me into something great. And really, I was just another experiment. Kira didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. Ashley's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you remember her? Our mother. Kira closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 6 years old again, curled up in her mother's lap as she braided her hair. The smell of jasmine shampoo, the sound of her humming. Yeah, Kira said softly. I remember. Ashley wiped at her face. I wish I did. The wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Somewhere out there, Whitmore was scrambling, his empire crumbling around him. But here, in this quiet moment, it didn't matter. Kira reached over and squeezed Ashley's hand. Her sister's fingers were cold, but they held on tight. Tomorrow, they'd contact the reporters. They'd release the files. They'd make sure the world knew what Charles Whitmore had done. But tonight? Tonight, they were just two sisters on a porch, watching the stars come out.